call today
Oh,
because
damn.
it's pretty intimate. Like everybody here is like really, really like engaged and very active. And look at David. Like look, he's bringing.
Oh my God, David's here. What?
Gosh, wait, look at him. Oh my gosh, David. I think you have more than coffee. In my head, I think you're having way more than coffee. I love
Did you
it.
make that? What is that? Where'd you
Yes.
get that? I want
Yeah.
that.
Colton's wearing the same one too.
What? Colton, what?
Dude.
Where are we? What?
We're not
Is this
allowed to
it?
sell them to you, but you can buy them if you ask for them to be made custom through the exact same customization.
This little logo
Wow.
right here, you might have seen that one before. Apparently it's not ours.
Not. Are we gonna be sued? Are we gonna be sued?
No, because we're not selling them. That's the magic ingredient. Is you're ordering a custom thing that just happens to be the same as the custom thing other people ordered, but we're not selling them.
So I'll drop the link.
Are we not selling them, or are we like
Exactly.
not selling them?
Not
Are we not
selling them at
selling
all.
them?
Not at
It's
all.
not-
You have to
it's
buy
not
yourself.
us that are selling them.
How many
Where
are
can
you
we,
guys not
Oh
selling?
my God.
I
Scott,
will
it's
post a
very,
link.
very confusing.
Nice,
But
Scott. We
amazing.
have a very productive library conversation right now. It is very important. We're not selling.
This is
shirts.
important stuff.
It's so important. It is so
Y'all
relevant.
y'all should all know about the new merch that we don't have.
Where's MMM? They should be plugging themselves right here. Where are the MMM people? The MMM people can't show up today, which is like.
You know, I live in the
Yeah.
west coast of Canada and near Vancouver, and my 19-year-old daughter took one look at the coat and she says, "Dad, does that mean you're gay?"
Congratulations.
Yeah.
Oh, I love it.
So that's the kind of stigma the rainbow has.
Oh, it's so sad.
Yeah, I was wondering if it was a good choice, but I don't know. Rainbows are really big in crypto too, so
Rainbows
I feel
are huge
like
in crypto.
we get it.
They're a freaking wallet.
Yeah,
Yeah.
my buddy's like the most amazing optical phenomena was hijacked by the gay movement. So yeah, rainbows are pretty awesome from the beginning. Doesn't matter what they represent.
Yeah, well, they represent my community, so I'm kind of stoked on them. They make me feel like I'm involved. So
Exactly, and we'll try to get you one.
Well, what you mean is that I will buy myself one because we don't
You
make.
will.
You're
Exactly,
getting it. You're
because-
getting it. Yeah, exactly.
You're
And I
getting
think
it,
the
but we're not
rainbow
selling it.
has enough space for all of us. I think we can share.
That
getting all this on the
jacket
live
is
stream today?
that jacket is a public good. Bam, on point, on topic, amazing.
Okay, well, wait. I want to throw something out there. I've been thinking about this a lot. Okay, so what is it that we always do? I'm sorry. I'm switching gears. I know this isn't going to be. This is something I've been thinking about a lot this week. I've been really excited about this meeting. I just want to throw one thing out there that I've been thinking about. Every time we talk about public goods, what is the first approach to defining public goods? Like, everyone give me your quick answer.
If you can access it without paying money.
Okay.
Non-exclusive,
Which is the jacket. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. But what we do is usually we define the public, right? That's the first thing we do. Okay, so it's a public good. What is a public? I think that's the wrong framework. I think you don't have a public without public goods. It's actually the other way around. Public goods are a threshold upon which a community of people depend on a bunch of pieces of what a community holds, and that's what takes it from being a club good to being a public good. Is if there's enough people depending on the public good, then it becomes a public.
Bit of philosophical judo there.
Yeah, I mean, but seriously, because like then you're like, okay, why fund public goods? Oh, because you can't have a public without public goods.
Yeah. What about like, for example, sidewalks are considered a public good, right?
Right. Well, you need sidewalks.
Yeah, you do need sidewalks. I was thinking of like how Twitter is kind of like a public good as well. Like, a lot of people post their Discord links or servers on Twitter and you can just click and join. So in a way, it's kind of public, but you really have to kind of just search for it. It's just low-hanging fruit, but it's that type of public good where it's like, it's there if you find it.
But isn't it like some sort of barrier that you have to find it rather than have it easily accessible?
Yeah, there's
Yeah.
a distinction to be made there that the information supplied through the internet and then hosted on Twitter is part of the public goods.
There
But
you
like
go.
Twitter itself, the platform, is definitely not.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I agree.
yeah. I think that's definitely because we use it as a community as critical infrastructure, right? So like that's maybe my point here is that like critical infrastructure for the function of a public is the public good. And without that critical infrastructure, you do not have a public. So if you don't need that structure, if like, for example, like, I mean, I'm sorry to call out the jackets, but the jackets are a club good. They're not a public good because we don't need them in order to run our public. We could have them and they're nice for our club. But like, let's say like you're not in the club unless you have a club jacket. Well, like that's not really true. Let's say if someone's onboarded, right? Like they enter the community and we say, oh yeah, like if you're part of this club, then you're supposed to have a jacket. But since we haven't gotten you a jacket yet, you're still part of the community, but you don't have a jacket yet. Then like the jacket's a club good, not a public good. But then let's say it's like, okay, we have a huge community of people, and somehow I don't know how you literally cannot participate in things unless you have a jacket. Like, then at that point maybe it becomes a public, but I don't know. That's that's rivalrous at that point or exclusive. But I don't know. It's just something I've been thinking about. I've been thinking about it all week since last week. So, anyway.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Touching on what Lynn wrote in the Public Goods Library channel about today's topic, ecology of decision making and design.
Bringing that, I would say that I'll quote Ben. That's a Ben question.
That's a Ben question? Okay.
That's a Ben West question. So I stole. Well, he put it up there, and I shared it with the group. So it's a Ben.
I'm particularly interested in how do we prevent bad actors from abusing public goods.
That's a great question. I mean, I think more public is the answer. I mean, the more that people are coordinated, the more that we have the ability to stand up to bad actors and to identify them and to create infrastructure to sort of deal with them would be my simple answer. But I'm sure there's a lot of different ways to look at this, and I would also say that all of us have the potential to be good or bad actors at any one time. I don't think that bad actors are sort of by definition always bad actors. We play different roles in each other's lives and in communities in various different ways, and sometimes are good and sometimes less so. But I think the simple answer to that is public goods infrastructure.
Okay. Here's a specific scenario. So a Web3 company issues a bounty, and thing is, it's only one bounty per wallet. And so a bad actor creates 10 different wallets to get to reap the benefits of the bounty 10 times more than they normally would. What type of, this is just like a thought experiment. So what would be a good type of public infrastructure to prevent that?
Like specifically for that, we're talking about, we've seen a bunch of airdrops. If you take the snapshot before you announce the airdrop, then it's out of the hands of the bad actors. They would have had to have been doing that on every single thing all over the place, and it would increase their costs to make it non-feasible. So just in that one specific instance.
What's a snapshot? What do you mean by that?
Okay, so let's take the ENS airdrop, for instance. Are you familiar with? Okay.
Yeah,
so,
I have one.
Yeah, I'm actually in the other window. I'm checking, did my other things count for that? It's not so easy to check. But so they didn't say, we're announcing today that anyone a month from now who has it will get the airdrop. They said we took we took a frozen snapshot of the state at this date in the past, and we're dropping it to people who had it at that date in the past. So it's not changeable anymore.
I love that. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. I love that.
We're going to be doing the exact same thing with the airdrop from Developer DAO as well. That seems to be the technique now.
That's a great solution. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like the idea of retroactively rewarding effort is really salient, specifically because it's difficult to game. It's the same thing that you see like in the Polkadot auctions. Like they have a candle auction, so there's like a 7-day period over which like you can't necessarily bid snipe. Are you familiar with the term bid sniping?
No.
So bid sniping is like when you go on eBay and there's like 30 seconds left on something, and so you bid like 5 cents over what it is that the most recent bid is, and then potentially you win, right? Like that's bid sniping.
Yeah.
And so how they solved that in Polkadot was by they take the standings for the auctions at some random block within a 7-day or seven. I think it's like a 7 epoch period prior to the end block of the auction, and so they just like select a random block using a verifiably random function, and then that way you can't game it because like the verifiably random function is what's deciding who wins. So there are ways to potentially do that stuff. I don't know. It's not the same thing as like preventing bad actors though, which is that's a good question.
I saw a technique from Solana, or the website that hosts Solana domains, where it's like every time there's a new bid, it extends the bid period by 10 minutes, which I think is also another technique to prevent bid sniping, right?
Yeah, I mean, that sounds like very similar. It sounds like it could be annoying.
Yeah, it was. I was helping my boyfriend secure a domain, and we were staying up until like 2 a.m. because someone was also bidding with us and kept pushing it back for like an hour.
Yeah, so it sounds like a lot of it's just like a design system. Like, how do you design it in order for it to prevent bad actors? But at the same time, I feel like I think it'd be nice, like once we get to a point like far, far into the future, is that we create a system where whoever's like entering the system or actually is in the system would naturally not be a bad actor. But I feel like that's like way, way far. But like in the long run, right? I always reference like Japan. Japan is my absolute favorite. Like it's been so long standing, but like in the sense like the kind of trust that Japan, like the entire environment has, is just amazing because like if you forget something, you're likely to find it there again. Just because the entire system says like that's the culture. The culture is you just return it to the rightful owner, or you don't, or you just leave it alone, right? So to me, I think it is so. Like we think it's probably not possible, but I think it's so possible to ingrain that culture, right? There's two sides of crypto. There's two sides of crypto. There's the flipping side of crypto, but like that's the side that I was not exposed to originally. I was exposed to Bitcoin's public goods, like first and foremost. And so when I find out about the other space, it felt like wrong in a sense. Like it felt like they weren't there to build, and it was a really weird. Like I felt so naive because I was like, wow, I forgot that things like that this actually happened. So I feel like in a way, when you onboard someone to the right proper channel, it can lead them to prevent them to be like bad actors naturally by system design. So yeah. I'll lead it back to Ben because Ben wanted to say something, and also he's on the call.
Yeah. So that's actually a pretty good transition into the. I put together a little deck based on the readings that were that I suggested for the week. I don't know if anybody has had a chance to look at them. I'm guessing probably not, or just a little bit, but I'll just kind of go over some of the ideas that were in those readings, and then maybe we could talk a bit more about it. I'm going to try sharing my screen if that's okay with everybody, and feel free to jump in obviously at any time. I mean, this is all for conversation, but I just thought I was inspired by Simona's deck a couple weeks ago. So
same. Yeah. That was really cool.
Yeah. Okay, let's see if this will work.
Also, for some reason, David, you're just like stuck on my screen. I'm just looking at your feed for some reason. To figure out why.
Hey Ben, is this slide on a Gitcoin channel?
I just
Yeah.
shared my screen, but I can also share my deck on the Gitcoin channel if you want.
I would love
That'd be
that.
great.
I see your screen, Ben. The sharing is working.
Sharing's working? Great. Okay. So just as a starting point, to me, one of the things that I'm the most excited about in the crypto space is DAOs and the ability they have to really leapfrog over a lot of the problems that we have in decision making and democracy in our world today. I see DAOs as kind of this opportunity for people who want to imagine the world in a different way to find new and novel ways to answer the some of the most difficult questions that we're looking for answers to. And the idea of decentralized decision making is nothing new. There's been co-ops and nonprofits and all kinds of different entities who've experimented with decentralized decision making in various ways. Little something about myself. One of my first memories as a child was taking minutes at a cooperative housing board meeting with crayons. And that's to say that I've been around some form of decentralized decision making for most of my life. My parents were both pretty involved in cooperatives when I was young, and I've spent the better part of my life in either nonprofits or political parties, mostly the Green Party, which work on consensus largely, or at least try to, but also run into all kinds of problems. So for me, I'm like super excited about the DAO space. Because I see it as sort of an extension of, this effort to find ways to find resolution to difficult problems and for humans to coordinate themselves. And I see huge leaps being taken forward already in doing that. The reason why I said the ecology of decentralized decision making, in part because I was, up late thinking about what to call this, and I was playing with the idea of Zen and the art of motorcycle maintenance, and came up with DAOs and the ecology of decentralized decision making, which actually sound nothing alike, although it sounded exactly the same to me in my mind. Thanks, David. The reason to include ecology in there, though, is I think that a big part of finding the solutions to these problems is looking at the systems around us and the sort of things that can be learned from the natural world in a variety of different ways. And I think it's important to understand, sort of from a systems thinking perspective, how basically everything's connected, both socially and sort of physically or metaphysically. So there's a larger context really for the decisions that we're making, for the DAOs and the ways that we're approaching the world. And to me, that's just sort of an interesting and sort of formative sort of starting point for a thought process of sort of how we can go about making decisions the best way possible inside of DAOs. Can you still see my screen?
Yeah.
When I clicked, I moved away from Discord, so I'll just look at this and keep clicking, and I'll just pretend I can see your faces. Okay, so how can we best design our community infrastructure for all the people and their ecosystems to thrive? And actually, Pan, you brought up the word infrastructure before, and we've talked a little bit about it already, which is kind of the segue that I was referencing, I guess. I think it's worth sort of taking a moment to think about the importance of infrastructure. Like, the way that we design things, the way that we build, the organizations that we invite people into has a lot to do with the culture and the experience that people have. And if we think proactively about, is this going to work for all people, and how does this fit into a larger ecosystem, and does this really lead to thriving? Not easy questions to answer, but I thought it would just be sort of an interesting prompt for sort of a thought experiment around this kind of larger question. I'll take one moment too, just to recognize the slide in the background. I was looking for various different solar punk images, and this is actually an artist from Colombia and their depiction of solar punk. I'll talk a little bit more about solar punk later, but I thought this was a particularly interesting sort of view of what solar punk could look like, which often looks a lot of different ways. And this is very much like a kind of people first instead of like a 10,000 foot view of like skyscrapers covered in green stuff. And I thought that was just sort of an interesting change from a lot of the other solar punk art that I've seen. How do we tell the story of a better world and how we can get there from here? And to a certain extent, I think this is one of the key questions that we, are confronted with as we sort of try to imagine how we get from here to a better future. And to me, I see DAOs and the crypto space generally in Web3 as potentially being a set of tools that can really help in that process. Definitely not a guarantee, but it's definitely an opportunity. It's an inflection point and a place where a lot of visionary people are coming together. And I will say, that I actually think this public library space is kind of key in that thought process. Like, this is where, we see a lot of people who are coming together trying to find answers to that question and really trying to sort of imagine that better world and paint a picture of it. Which is very much what solar punk is about, which I keep coming back to because obviously that's something I'm interested in, and we'll sort of talk a bit more about that in a further slide. But I thought that was a key one. And again, just taking a second to recognize why I picked this picture. This is to me kind of one of those like just images of sort of what's going on in the world that sort of shows this contrast between like, a world literally on fire. This is like a, massive forest fire happening in California. Could have just as easily been in British Columbia or any number of other places in the world. But, with people kind of just going about their life playing golf at the same time, and it's kind of the disconnect of like just continuing to go on with business as usual while we're sort of facing a crisis. And in this particular case, I would argue that it's kind of part of this larger climate crisis conversation.
I'd also like to point out here that you chose golfing, which golfing is the worst sport. It's the most land intensive, exclusive sport. In order to be able to golf, you have to pay so much to be able to get the tools to be able to golf. The golf courses get exceptions from all of the drought rules all over California. Particular people like to golf. I'll just use it. I'll say it that way. Yeah. And so I really love that you picked this because it speaks more volumes than I think maybe I'm loving it. So
yeah, no, it definitely was intentional. And it definitely is kind of the opposite of public goods in the sense that it eats up a tremendous amount of public space and green space, but is totally exclusionary, and usually very expensive. And like you said, uses a lot of water, and which it becomes even more of an issue when you're sort of looking at it in the context of forest fires. And was it Winston Churchill who said, golf is a really great way to ruin a nice walk? There's something to that. So the first reading that I pulled out was from this amazing leader, Jeanette Armstrong. She's from the Penticton Indian Band in British Columbia. And I actually came across this reading in a book that was put together by a group called the Bioneers. And in part, I wanted to recommend this particular reading. And if you look at the link, I actually uploaded a PDF of the entire book that this particular reading was in. The Bioneers is a really interesting group. They're based in California. You have to have a pretty high tolerance for sort of woo-woo language. It's very kind of hippie visionary stuff, but just filled with totally fascinating human beings who have really interesting ideas about how to build a better world. And this was how I came across Jeanette Armstrong. The article that I highlighted was called Decision Making as if the Sustainability Mattered. And it focuses on this idea of Ann Oken, which this was a quote that I took from the book. I'm going to try to not be that person who just reads every slide to you, but I thought this particular one was kind of interesting. It's an Okanagan word that invokes an image of liquid being absorbed drop by single drop through the head, coming to understand through a gentle integrative process. And I just thought that was sort of a beautiful way of describing decision making. in particular, the thing that really jumped out to me as sort of fascinating from this this process that the Penticton Band used historically, and Jeanette Armstrong has been sort of personally shepherding, sort of bringing back into use, is a different form of representative roles. Like basically, when they make a decision, the community members break themselves sort of into these 4 different categories. And I put mother and father in quotation marks because she actually goes to lengths to highlight that these aren't recognitions of gender. They're more of a sort of a representation of different perspectives that they want to incorporate into their decision making. So if you're playing the role of a child or an elder, your focus is on the future or the past. And if you were playing the role of a mother or a father, your focus is either on expansion and growth, and that's kind of the father principle. And then the mother role is largely about the kind of care for the community. And, you know, that I think brings with it a whole conversation around sort of, you know, gender norms and the nuclear family model and all that. You know, I actually, in preparation for this conversation, went back and watched some talks that she's given, and she actually expands more and more on sort of how these roles are actually delineated in communities. And actually her role in her community is that of an elder, even since she was a child, which I thought was interesting. You know, so it really could be anybody from a community playing these various different roles. The way that I sort of find this particularly interesting as it relates to DAOs, and like one of the things that I think personally is kind of problematic with decision making in a lot of the world, really, is kind of moving away from what could be seen as sort of like popularity contests or like appointing somebody to be like a president or a vice president of something, and instead sort of having representative roles where you're representing a sub-community or a group of stakeholders or a certain perspective that you're accountable to, and sort of seeing leadership as more of an accountability or a responsibility to some sub-community, as opposed to, you know, sort of an opportunity for an individual to step forward and sort of exert their view or their vision. I think it's important that we don't sort of paint all Indigenous cultures with the same brush. Like, this is very particular to one very specific community. But I think it's a very interesting example of how decisions are made differently in some cultures. And, you know, and I think it's worth taking a look at that and sort of thinking about what could be learned from it. One example that really resonated with me when I sort of was looking at how decisions were made at my college many years ago. I was quite involved in the Board of Governors and the Senate. And the Board of Governors was like a bunch of appointed government representatives and sort of a small smattering of people who'd been elected from within the community. Whereas the Senate was made up of representatives of each different department who had a responsibility and accountability back to that department. And as a political science student at the time and sort of being involved in these communities, I really felt like the Senate was actually a much better decision-making entity than the board was, because you know, each decision was like, what's the best that we can bring to this from the world of physics or from the world of history or sociology or the business department or whatever it might be. And decisions were really seen, you know, as something that was a responsibility that you brought back to your community. And then sort of the folks from within that area of knowledge would sort of take their understanding of that issue, their perspective of that issue, and try to apply it to decision making. I'm not sure what that means for DAOs, and of course every DAO is different, but I do think that some interesting things could sort of evolve from an approach where we sort of look at representation somewhat differently. I'm just going to keep going because I can't see your faces, so I can't tell if people are sort of reacting, but feel free to jump in, like I said, if there's anything that you feel like saying. I was going to transition from here to talking about what does it mean to take the green pill. And, you know, I think we're talking a fair amount about taking the green pill right now because of, you know, the Matrix movie coming back out, but also just because it's a great sort of play on the sort of two visions of the future, you know, take the red pill or the blue pill, you know, being sort of the traditional Matrix choice, although it's a very different kind of a choice, because in the Matrix you were being asked to choose between continuing to stay in an illusion of reality versus seeing a pretty ugly truth, but then having the ability to transcend that. The green pill to me is kind of a step beyond what happens after you take the, which one was the one that showed you the true reality? The blue pill, the red pill?
The red pill.
Red pill, thank you. So, and often people talk about being crypto pilled as sort of like a transition into the space, like sort of an awakening into this new reality. To me, the green pill is basically a recognition of like a decision to try to make a solar punk or sort of a more positive, livable future a reality. Or to put it another way, it's kind of an attempt to find answers to the question that I posed earlier, like how do we create the infrastructure that actually works for all people and leads to thriving ecosystems. And I think that is really part of what we're trying to build, like having a vision of how do we use the tools that we have now, the community infrastructure that we're building together, how do we use that to achieve goals that are the kind of future that we'd actually like to see. And that leads me to talking about Janine Benius, who you might remember Simona actually brought up in the call that she moderated. I'm also a big fan of Janine Benius. I included the first chapter of her book, Biomimicry, Innovation Inspired by Nature, as something to check out. I think there is just so much fascinating stuff coming out of the world of biomimicry. Basically, it's an attempt to say, has nature already found an answer to these questions? And Janine's actually set up a website a few years back called asknature.net, I think it is, where basically people can pose any kind of a design challenge that they're working on, and then seek answers from people from a interdisciplinary school of thought. So it could be biologists, it could be ecologists, it could be people from a variety of different backgrounds. And they find some really fascinating answers to any number of different problems. And in particular, I think people would be interested to check out some of the stuff that's coming out of the governance thread, looking at sort of structures, say, for example, in ant colonies and elsewhere, like sort of how decisions are made in natural systems. There's a lot of complexity there and a lot to unpack. Probably a sort of easier to wrap your head around example, and one of the ones that's often pointed to as sort of an interesting example of biomimicry, was actually the bullet trains. As they were first coming out in Japan, there was one of the chief engineers on this project just happened to be a master birder. And they had this problem, which was that the trains, when they were coming in and out of tunnels, were creating sonic booms. And it was very unpleasant for people in the surrounding area. It was also creating a fair amount of friction, which would actually slow the trains down. And what this birder did was he basically looked at the kingfisher bird, this bird you see here, which dives into the water to fish. And basically what they did was they looked at the design of this beak and realized that it was a very effective structure for moving from one medium to the other, basically from the air to underwater. And by emulating that design and putting it on the front of bullet trains, it actually reduced the drag by 30% on these trains, and increased the efficiency of the trains, therefore, in terms of their energy consumption, but also got rid of the sonic boom problem as they were coming from inside of a tunnel to outside of a tunnel. Which to me is just totally fascinating, and it's just one of many different examples. So
I kind of want to jump in here a little bit and expand the thinking about biomimicry, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, please do.
Because I think that one of the things people kind of make the mistake of doing is when they talk about biomimicry, they talk exclusively about like organic structures. And the reality is that like there's like a technological stack across all of, I hate to use like Web3 words, but like it's the reality of the situation. We all work tech adjacent here somehow. But there is a technological stack that exists within all of nature, and nature meaning physical systems from all the way down to the atomic level, that can be reflected throughout the entire system. So there's this great NASA scientist named Mark Lupacella, and he co-wrote alongside a bunch of NASA scientists this book called Cosmos and Culture. And his core argument is that there are, and this is like I'm sure that y'all have heard me talk about like complex system science before, but this is one of those things that like ties in, is that there are laws that dictate the formation of systems all the way down from the atomic level all the way up to the cultural level. And the book also argues that information technology is an extension of culture, which is really interesting. So because of that, the idea of coming up with analogous solutions for a lot of our problems, it's almost a question of we can look at all physical systems that have emerged out of how it is that technology, or how it is that nature has come up with technology. And so it's like, can we learn any insights about organization from the way that a bismuth crystal forms? Can we learn anything about governance from I don't know, like I can't come up with one off the top of my head, but it's just like we can like governance from the way that molecules comprise physical matter. Like maybe there are insights there. And I don't think that people generally, the biomimicry sort of perspective a lot of the time tends to stick itself entirely in organic materials and organic beings and organic structures, and forgets that those are really just emergent events as a result of the physical systems that manifest them. And the physical systems that manifest them have their own organizational structures, and also deserve insight. And so that's something, and then by extension, like a lot of the rules that govern both of those systems, so whether inorganic or organic systems, also determine a lot of how cultural systems manifest, and as an extension, also govern how it is that the emergent qualities of information come together. So like I think maybe one of the things that is kind of interesting is, instead of looking at how it is that technology can reflect nature, it's to look at how does technology already reflect nature. Like not how can you build technology to reflect nature, but rather what things have we done that are already natural, and can we build on the natural pieces of those of the stack we're building.
That's so cool. Thank you for articulating that, Pan. I totally and utterly agree with what you're saying. And I think my guess is that a big part of the reason why so much of the focus of biomimicry has been on basically engineering is because it's largely been engineers who've taken an interest in sort of doing something with this space. But I think there's so much more to unpack from it. And it sort of speaks to this larger like ecology of and sort of systems thinking approach. Like, these are not disparate things. We're not separate from the natural world, even within our technology. It's all really part of the same ecological systems. And, even if we don't realize it, we're often emulating patterns that have existed for, millennia within nature in various different ways. One of the things that I think is really neat about what the Biomimicry Institute is advocating for in particular is they're basically saying if you borrow an idea from somewhere in the natural world, that some portion of the proceeds should go to help protecting, the habitat of that species. It's kind of an interesting sort of approach to similar to that conversation we had last week about, how do you fund public goods? There's an interesting sort of thought process there about, sort of honoring where you got, a solution to a problem from. And, it's a little bit harder to imagine how you do that when we start bringing it down to the cellular or molecular level. But, I think there's still some inherent wisdom in that sort of thinking and that thought process. So, yeah, I just wanted to introduce the idea of sort of what can we learn from nature as another prompt anyway. I think there's a ton to unpack there.
Questions. Ben,
Yeah.
in terms of learning from nature, like what I feel like the communities that scale really well and are highly cohesive are like ant colonies, but do you know of any other like mammal cultures that have that type of scale and functionality?
I mean, I guess it depends what you mean by scale well.
Right.
I think
All I know is that ants are pernicious, but they're widespread and they function well together.
totally.
One of the reasons that ants and bees and other creatures that live in colonies like this function so well together is because from a genetic biology point of view, you can actually see them as being one large creature, and each of those ants is
Exactly.
a
Like
cell.
a hive mind.
Yeah, well, very literally a hive.
Yeah.
Because the reproductive. You can find this in Richard Dawkins' writings, and I'll talk more about memes and how we're going to spread the green pilling meme. What we can do with that.
Love that.
Using colony creatures like ants and bees by analogy has led to a lot of really cool technological innovations. Like before or adjacent to torrenting, there was an ant-based approach that I was in love with, and we're gonna find that getting inspiration from these natural systems involves living with them and like being
Yes.
familiar with them.
Yes.
It's not or I've found anyway, that it's not enough to like look at a picture of a thing to try to copy of it. Excuse me, sorry.
You okay?
I always want to like try to hand somebody water through
He's
this
coughing.
screen.
Right? I think he's coughing.
Maybe we can do it in virtual
Yeah.
I
world.
love that Ryan brought that up because that's something we talked about that in the MMM work stream because we're trying to create memes, but I suggested that we should all find out what they are first. Like,
You should find the meme before you make the meme, kind of thing. I know that sounds like recursive, but it makes
No,
sense.
I think fundamentally understanding what memes are.
Yeah.
If we could, the original place that the term meme was introduced was in The Selfish Gene by Richard Dawkins. It's actually 2 books. The Extended Phenotype being the one that we should take a lot of our inspiration from here, because you can see sort of the DAO and the digital DAO structures that we're working with as being part of our extended phenotype. And nature has this sort of fractal underpinning that I haven't yet seen a good fractal governance structure arise, but I'm very interested in participating in it. Even at a rudimentary level, if we had like a 5 people choose 1 representative, 5 representatives choose 1 delegate, something like that, I'd be
Wait a
very
second.
interested in trying it out.
I actually tweeted about that a while ago. I don't know if it's exactly a fractal, but the term is called parpolity. Is that what you're? Have you heard of that term?
I'm ready to read the wiki page. Please drop a link.
I actually found the idea from Aaron Swartz's Weblog. If you know who Aaron Swartz is.
Yes, he's a hero. We all know
I
who
love
Aaron
him.
Schwartz is, of
I
course.
know. Like anytime I just want to like tickle my brain, I just go to his blog and pick a random article. Such a prolific and like to the point writer, but his idea was parpolity, and he used America as an example, where 5 to the power of 13 is the population of America. And so what I was thinking for decentralized governance, what Ryan was talking about was like, you have a DAO. All of its members are assigned a sequential number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, going on. And then in groups of 5, within that group of 5, you nominate 1 person. So that way you only have to care about 5 people at a time. And then that nominated person goes into groups of 5 with other nominated people, and among those people, they nominate 1 person. And then that way you can scale decentralized governance. And I feel like that's really effective, especially if you randomize the assigned numbers.
And so
Yeah,
where has that been rolled out? I'm very interested to see like what kind of
Yeah.
results that's gotten.
FDD Workstream is rolling that out.
Hey!
That's exactly why we're doing the squads and the different levels as they are. Is so you stay under the Dunbar's number, and you can handle things at the social layer according to like Ostrom's work. Yep.
Well, there's a lot of people who've been saying that the future of DAOs is sub DAOs, and I think that logic is super salient. I think it makes a lot of sense because it's like exactly what we've been talking like you just mentioned, Joe, right? Like it keeps you underneath the organizational threshold for actual governance is to like make sure you're keeping things small and governing that thing, and then you have like it's kind of like how companies work sometimes, right? Like it doesn't make sense for one person to manage like 15 people. It makes sense for like one person to manage like 3 people who manage 5 people, and that organizational structure kind of like is more sensible and more manageable in general. So I don't know, it's interesting to see like or like I think this is something I like reflect on a lot of the time is like we talk about the idea that DAOs are revolutionary, and I'm like, what? They're revolutionary in a way, but like there's other ways that you're saying they're revolutionary, which they're really not.
They have the potential to be. That's the thing that jumps out at me. And I think actually like kind of coming back to that like examples of things in nature that scale. Like I think really to a certain extent what we're talking about is carrying capacity. Going back to my poli-sci days, I'm remembering that I think Plato had this idea of the ideal society being, I forget what the exact number was, but it was like 1,193 people or something. Like there was like the exact number of people that he thought were governable within one sort of like set of structures. And I worry a little bit about being too prescriptive about a specific number because I think the dynamics can change pretty dramatically from one circumstance to another. Like I think when you look at sort of communities of species in nature, I mean, there's kind of different carrying capacities for different communities of animals depending on the resources and their needs and sort of the dynamics of the group and and sort of how they sort of interact with each other. So easier said than done to sort of pick a number, but I think also having a number is a great way to start to sort of unpack that conversation and try to figure out what the best approach is.
Zari, were you going to say something?
I kind of lost my train of thought. I wanted to say that some of these topics, I'm actually interested in covering them. And I don't know if you know, we have a research stream in the FDD, so I would like to ask anyone who wants to join me on working on stuff like that, because if you look at the Notion page, those are actually some of my like medium to long term research topics. One's about mimetics, the other one that I wanted to ask you guys before and girls. Do you think decentralization can work?
Not pure decentralization.
Sorry?
Not pure decentralization. Maybe this is entirely my opinion, but I think that the idea of decentralization as like the core rule for everything is like good systems are distributed, right? But like they still have to have localities that are they still have to be like self-sustaining microsystems, and I mean, you do have to still have that. Otherwise, like you just have disaggregated function and things don't happen, and you end up with like I don't know. It's like kind of what happens with the Ethereum development process, right? Like you have a lot of people contributing to it, and it slows down the movement of the system. So you do need to have some level of centralization for execution, but it depends where you have it, and you have to make sure that centrality isn't governing the whole system. It's not taking over the whole system, and that's I think what like even people like Vitalik are trying to do.
Going back to nature, I love that. But going back to nature, like in nature, hierarchies are actually based on serotonin levels, right? And
Interesting.
yeah, that's even lobsters like function like that. It's I think they were like the lobsters were the oldest to use hierarchies based on serotonin, and yeah, that's also one of my crazy research topics. So if
Consider the lobster.
Yeah.
yeah,
I
the
think
lobster,
there's
but like can decentralization work in like the way that some people want it to work, when in fact in nature like it's so hierarchies are not like directly centralized, but you need to have like basically decentralized hierarchies, like something like that.
I
Like a
think there's
network of hierarchies.
sorry, Joe, go ahead.
Like a network of hierarchies. So the idea would be that when people say sub-DAO, the thing that irks me is that it applies either subservience or like a being a subset of, and therefore not could become greater than. And I think what we're all trying to get at is unlocking like latent talent and potential in people and in collective organization. So when we think of the sub-DAOs, if they're networked together, then there isn't one that's necessarily in charge, but there are hierarchies of order for how different decisions are made and flow. It's just that one of them, any one of them, can be as great or greater than any of the others. So that would include the individuals and the collective levels. So in our squads, we would think of it like the squad doing a specific task could do it so well that they would get more funds than an entire initiative with 4 squads in it. And eventually they would have to make more sub squads, and then they would grow bigger and bigger. And maybe they're bigger than the FTD work stream as a whole, and they're applying directly to the DAO. Maybe they stop just applying to Gitcoin DAO. Maybe they're applying to the Gates Foundation and the U.S. government and whatever else. You know, it's the sub DAO thing. It's almost like you should think of it more like your child. Like you don't. They're not a subset of like you. You're not participating in being a part of the parent. You're just participating in decentralized and autonomous organizing.
This is really interesting, right? Because like I don't know, some of you know this, some of you don't know this, but I work for like a large validator provider. We validate on like 40 and maybe almost 60 networks right now. And one of the things that we've been encountering that's really interesting is there is no framework for being able to work with teams the way that we do. Just like we work with distributed teams, we work with so many people across so many different protocols that managing those relationships is really difficult and a fascinating problem to solve, because I think we internally sometimes we try to solve it as if like we're a corporation, and it's like I don't know if that's not going to work in this situation, because like a lot of these things haven't been thought out. But that is something that we're starting to see differentiate within the space, is the need for like really good inter-organizational tools, and they're going to feed up to like companies like the one I work at. You know, it's because we need that stuff. Like we don't know how to interact with a bunch of teams that like are managing all these little pieces, and you know, we just don't have the tools for it. So like sometimes I kind of wonder if like the future for the company I'm at is to become a whole bunch of sub-DAOs as well.
Yeah, I think that whole conversation around sort of DAOs and sub-DAOs is really interesting as well. And thanks for raising that, Joe. You know, the thing I kind of came back to in the context of the sort of learning from nature piece was like, I mean, actually, funny enough for me, reflected in the nature of you know, decentralized organizations. You know, so looking at humans, but you know, what I've seen happen in organizations that try to be really flat, and I'm wondering if this is part of the experience that you're bringing to this as well, Pan, when you sort of reacted to this to begin with. But like what in particular, what I'm thinking about is the Green Party in Canada, which I used to be quite involved in. it was a group that really tried to work on consensus rules, not on Robert's Rules of Order, but like really on flat consensus, and experimented with leaderless models. But what ended up happening was that the loudest voices continued to sort of dominate. Like hierarchies kind of created themselves in a vacuum, and would sort of push to get their way until there was consensus. And basically to sort of be an obstacle to something moving forward, you actually had to really put yourself out there if you didn't feel comfortable with something, because there wasn't a sort of structure in place that made it more comfortable. And you could say that that's a culture, but there really was, I think, some structural impediments to making people feel safe and comfortable to be voicing contrary opinions. And one thing that we actually brought in to sort of one of the subgroups within the Green Party, a regional group, was this process of what we called courageous conversations, which basically was sort of an invitation to bring forward the more difficult things to say that were important to the group, but there was sort of some limiting factor to people's sort of feeling like that space existed or the comfort existed to say something contrary. And this might be a little bit out of left field from what was being discussed, but I think there's like something to be said for sort of understanding the dynamics between people and how that plays itself out in decision making, whether it's a hierarchical structure or a non-hierarchical structure. Like some people will just feel more comfortable as extroverts, or through culture and privilege feel like they have the space or the sort of they feel empowered to speak up, whereas sometimes other people don't. And as a straight white male, I often find myself feeling the need to sort of step back and not take up as much space, but without sort of structure in place to sort of try to ensure that that's the case. I've definitely seen lots of cases where that's not what happens, but people just step forward and sort of fill up whatever space is available. So not sure where to go with that. Maybe I'll just move to my next slide. We're already a bit over the time that was available.
Yeah, and unfortunately I have to go, but y'all have been so lovely. I hope the rest of this discussion keeps going very well.
Yeah,
sure.
I mean, I would say let's give it a 5 minutes just to kind of cap a conversation, about 1 hour and 15 minutes. But this has been a wonderful conversation.
Always a pleasure, Pam.
Also, I would just add that I feel like the conversation you were just touching on, Ben, well, one, this has been a beautiful call. Thank you so much. And I think this is something that is really important to think intentionally about, because DAOs in general, like, it rewards the extroverted, the extroverted personality that can just like assert themselves and show up and participate. And I think intentionally creating safe space and invitations to engage and participate to those that are not so extroverted is a really important nuance that can get lost in the excitement of everyone that does feel comfortable to participate. So thank you for that, planting that seed.
For sure. And actually, just to build upon that, something that came up in a conversation in another sort of social impact related thread in another DAO recently was there's a blind guy who was participating and had felt like he and a lot of people within the disabilities community had been sort of structurally left out of much of what happens inside of Web 2. And he was really advocating for design choices that really took into account the needs of people with disabilities, in particular the blind community. But there's also lots of other considerations like that for folks who have different needs. And I just thought it was a really beautiful intervention that he offered, and something that is probably worth bringing to the surface as well in terms of a conversation around infrastructure. Because as we're building out the infrastructure of Web3 and the tooling required for decentralized decision making, there's big chunks of people who can just be fundamentally left out of the conversation because they just don't have the ability to access or use the tools in the way that other people do. This is something that I've run into in my sort of day job doing public engagement processes. We realized that the platform that we were using for those engagements, had some room for improvement in terms of accessibility. It largely happened when we were working with the disability rights group that we realized how much more accessible the process could be. And, I saw somebody who used a screen reader actually went through our platform with us and showed us what the experience was like for them, or we could hear what the experience was like for them, trying to listen to what our page sounded like. So just something else to think about as we're sort of imagining and exploring what we could do to sort of make our space inclusive and really make it work for everybody who might be involved. I'm just going to use 1 minute to go to the next slide, just because there was one other reading that I'd thrown in here. This was basically just an article looking at a variety of different solar punk visions of the future. And the thing that actually kind of jumped to mind, this was actually a couple of pictures that Kevin posted on Twitter, and I thought it was just a really interesting conversation that flowed out of it. Because some people were actually saying that the cyberpunk looking future, or the sort of more dystopian future on the left of the screen here, actually looked like a more interesting place, which was a bit of a shock to me, I guess, because to me it seems pretty evident that it would be a lot better to be on the sort of right hand side of the screen in the sort of greener, peaceful looking, sort of less polluted space. But I think the importance of the solar punk genre, just to kind of come back to this because I keep sort of referring to it, is that it's an invitation to really paint a picture of what that future could look like. And I think that picture could be painted a lot of different ways. And sort of ties back into what Ryan was saying about memes and their importance. Like, the stories that we tell about the world that we live in and the world that we want to live in are really important. And most of the visions of the future that we see in the media today are more on the dystopian side of the spectrum. I think it's a big opportunity for us, and I think a really exciting and important thing that Gitcoin is doing to really sort of center this conversation in the conversation around public goods. And the more that we can play a role in sort of painting that picture of a better future, I think the more people will become part of this group. I think there's questions about carrying capacity and how we structure that. That's a whole other conversation. And we were talking a bit about that with the librarian group kind of right before this call, is like, what is the carrying capacity of this group? And, and how do we sort of structure the library moving forward as more people get involved? I particularly think actually as Ethereum moves to proof of stake from proof of work, we're going to see more and more people on the sort of environmentalist end of the spectrum who may have had some concerns getting involved in particular. And I would predict that this sort of focus on public goods and, sort of a solar punk future will probably be a real magnet for a lot of those people. It definitely has been for me. And I guess I just want to end by giving a shout out to the climate cause-based sort of component of the Gitcoin round. I think it's a really exciting and sort of revolutionary thing that Gitcoin is doing to sort of really intentionally reach out to groups and sort of try to onboard them into Web3, and also to sort of give a real opportunity to people to fund and support groups within the Web3 world, or folks who are sort of just being introduced to the Web3 world that, have an interest in, being part of articulating what a better future could be and actually are working on it. So I'm just really excited about that particular component of the grant round. And, I would, if I had a call to action, I guess, to end this thing, like if there was, something that you could do to help spread the word about that cause round, it definitely could use a little bit more traffic being driven to it and sort of support for the projects within it right now. There's definitely a lot of support coming in, but, there's a lot of noise out there on the internet. So just wanted to sort of throw that out there that, if there's something that you want to do concretely coming out of this call today, that just I shared a link in the public goods channel that takes you directly to that cause space where you can see the 23, 24 projects that are listed there. yeah, please share it and talk about it. Okay, I'll stop rambling on and I'll stop sharing my screen. This has been super fun, everybody. Does anybody want to jump in and say some closing things with those? I know we're kind of right at that 12:15 mark, but I don't want to eat up all the oxygen in the room here.
The best part is there is no oxygen being lost because we're all remote, which is amazing. Amazing. So,
True.
yes, thanks so much for the conversation. Like, this is actually wonderful. I finally get to attend the entire call, so thanks so much for leading. I think there's so many stuff to talk about for the next call. I think there's a lot of conversation that we can always tie back to the previous call, and I definitely think this one is one of those really important one because to me, infrastructure is where the beginning of community happens because you build it, right? Like you have to be so intentional because like it's all kind of similar to the idea of onboarding, which is like, do we have to start out with preventative methods to get rid of bad actors, or do we just build a space? It's just being super intentional from the future on point and so on. It's like preventative methods or just keep on building. And so that's something that was been swirling around my head, which obviously relates back to the library. But yeah, so that's it on my end, and I think this is also a good cap. If anybody have anything else to say, yeah. All right, thanks so much, Ben. Thanks so much for modding today's call.
My pleasure.
Thanks everybody for attending,
Thank you, Ben.
Thank you, Ben.
Cheers,
and thank
y'all.
you everybody for showing up. Bye, guys.